right, welcome everyone to Wick's Garage. I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at the last couple of years of the project wide body, the Carrera 3.0 RSR project that I'm building. Of course, it started out as this 77 donor car. It's a mid-year that's been transformed into a wide body turbo look car. A lot of these originally was Guards Red. There, of course, is the awful sunroof. Just a quick look at the interior. Had a Raid steering wheel in there. Of course, had air conditioning that didn't work, so poor AC install. It does have pop-out windows and bad Bondo all over. The interior was a hot mess. As you can see here, it had sheepskin covers faded and awful white inserts that were pretty trashed. Turbo T-tray tail and the AC components there. Kind of all the original G-body components. Last registered in '96 in California, so hadn't been running for a long time, over 20 years. Here's a look at the greasy 2.7. So it was a complete car. That's kind of one of the reasons why I purchased it. I picked it up for 14 grand, which these days is a steal, even in this condition. Numbers matching, motor and trans, but obviously the body highly modified to look like a turbo. Had some 17-inch aftermarket cast wheels, which I sold. Turbo tail, super heavy. Another look at the interior and the sunroof, hack job. Had an early Blaupunkt radio in it, which was cool. And the interior was just absolutely trashed. There was a fire on the top of the parcel tray. Flag mirrors, which was standard for 77. Now this front fender was an actual turbo fender, which I later sold. I originally wanted to make it a 74 IROC car. I was gonna make it into an IROC clone. But after I started to look into all the Bondo, I knew I had to cut the turbo look fenders off because they were just so poorly put on. They were lap welded and then they were just backfilled with Bondo, kind of a cave and pave situation. Fresh air and AC mods to the fresh air intake. This was the original 77 narrow body fender that had been turned into a wide body fender. Again, lap welded. Look at a little bit of the rust. And this was the sunroof drain tube. Awful install. Somebody had replaced the front pan. Really a rust-free chassis overall, though. That was one of the main reasons why I picked this one up. I knew I didn't want to fight a lot of metal work with rust. Look again at the 2.7. Missing all the intake. It did come with the original heat exchangers. We used 2 jacks, one on the trans and one on the engine. I just kind of steadied it as we lowered it out of the car. Pretty easy with the bumper off. What was great about this project was it came with a complete car. You know, all the extra parts, the motor, the trans. So I knew I wouldn't be using this 2.7. I had purchased a 3.2 a year before that I wanted to use in this project. I knew I was going to sell this motor, and I did end up selling it, I think, for $2,500, which again, these days probably bring like closer to $6,000 even in that condition. The 2.7 has the 7R case, which is a great case for earlier cars. Guys love to use a 2.7 crank and 2.7 case. Of course, some of the interior, I would find like all the specialty hardware that you need. So of course, save that, had it replated. Awful interior, old worn out speakers, of course, that we removed. The interior was like a white inserts and white sunroof liner that was just trash. That's a sunroof, aftermarket sunroof switch. And this is some of the aftermarket sunroof wiring that was behind the fuel gauge. Here you can see the front mounted motor in the sunroof, which is unusual and absolute trash. More images of the really poor sunroof install. Most of the rust was from the poor seal there. It was mostly surface rust. I got this car out of San Francisco area, but overall, again, the body's super dry. You can see some of the brackets they used to hold the sunroof attachment in, just black. So look at the interior, seats are out, sugar scoop rings came off the car when I got it. This is the Ungo box. It's an early anti-theft system. Poor install, looked like one of those installs I did back in the day of like car audio, you know. You're like 16 and you're putting a new stereo system in your Honda Civic or whatever it is, and it's just hastily installed with butt connectors. This is the rear sound pad, showing the original paint of the car. Was guards red, like I said. First time being out for the sound pad. And then I think I weighed it, yeah, it's close to 10 pounds just for that piece. And then the lower sound pad that sits in the rear seats is even heavier. The thing's a monster. That comes in, I think, at like 20. So 17 and a half pounds. Quite a bit of weight between those two sound pads. There was, after I blasted the car, I did find a small amount of rust in the back seat, but it's nothing major. My buddy Ryan and Matt came over to help me remove a lot of the interior components, like the gauges and clamshell for the steering wheel and all that stuff. One of the rusted out bolts in the rear. Just cutting a slot into it so I can unscrew it with a screwdriver. This is the bezel. There's like a leather cover. The fresh air control was actually pretty nice. Removing the handbrake assembly and the heat levers. This is the pedal brake assembly. I did restore that in one of the other videos. You can see me do a step-by-step restoration on that. Those are the defrost vents and some of the dash pad that just is glued on. So pulled that right off. I actually sold all the dash stuff to a guy in South Africa. And we're taking off some more of the interior components there, the clamshell and steering column. Getting little tiny screws out. These are triple square attachments, so you can get the door latch mechanism out. Of course, removed all the old worn out rubber trim. All that'll be replaced. We paint the car. Some of the floor tar that I removed. It's about 12 pounds of tar that's on the interior floor. And these are the rear engine mounts. Pulled those out. Poor condition. I'll probably update to cabriolet mounts, which are a little stiffer and still rubber. And this is the rear shock mounts. Disassembling the rear suspension. So here I'm draining out the brake fluid. Just disgusting old brake fluid from 20 years ago. Apply pressure there and bleed out the fluid out of the calipers. Here I'm removing the rear brake calipers. These are the standard mid-year rear calipers. They're iron. I think I sold off most of the stuff on this car. That was my intent from the get-go. I knew I wanted to do a lot of upgrades, both in the suspension and the braking and overall in the car. So I got the car for 14 grand and then sold the engine, trans, and wheels for about 6,000. A lot of other components here and there for another probably 2,000 to 4,000. So I still have boxes and boxes of stuff. That's why it's great to start with a full, complete project car, even if you know you're gonna highly modify it, because you can always resell the parts that aren't complete trash. Here I'm removing the rear torsion bars. Now this one on the passenger side was stuck in the spring plate. So to get it out, I drilled a hole in the end and then used a tap to thread into there. And then the tap pushed the torsion bar out. And there we got the spring plate off. Nice adjustable spring plates. I think I sold those because I knew I wanted to use a higher end spring plate. The banana arms, the trailing arms are out. We're removing the rockers. Those are real turbo rockers. I sold those along with the rear quarters. They were real turbo quarters. So a lot of nice little parts on here that I could sell for good money and obviously wasn't going to use. Lots of dirt and crud everywhere. This T-tray spoiler weighed like 60 pounds with the air conditioner condenser in it. Same with the bumper. I think the bumper comes in at like over 50 pounds. Just so much weight on the rear end of a G-body. All that's gonna be gone. Came with spacers too, H&R spacers. Sold those. This is the front suspension removal. I had to drill out the wedge bolt. Smack it with a sledgehammer. I'm gonna replace that wedge bolt, obviously. Pulling out the inserts. Bilstein front struts. pin that goes underneath the front, holds the front castle nut on the lower control arm. Didn't really matter because that one castle nut underneath was on unbelievably tight. It took me like 3 days to get it off, heating it up. I actually ended up cutting it. That's the P210 special tool to get the castle nut. I had this dumb idea that I was gonna be able to just get it off by applying pressure with a jack. But yeah, it was not coming off. This is the US front impact spacer. It was only on one side. One side didn't even have the spacer on it. Here I'm applying heat to that castle nut to try to get it loose. Eventually I had to cut it off. Showing the wear on the spindle. I sold those spindles to a guy, full disclosure, that he was just gonna use for a roller. Some of the parts were literally just hanging on the car, like the front impact strip. Lots of deferred maintenance and wear and tear on this car. Here's taking off the front bumper, showing the front impact shocks. Those things are super heavy. Taking apart the front bumper, taking the bellows off. This is the front rounds, showing the 915 that came with it, and some of the wiring. I started to remove the front harness there. I did end up pulling the wiring completely out of the car. Kind of pare down the wiring harness, remove a lot of the stuff I don't need. So the interior is pretty much stripped there. The front area is pretty much stripped as well. This is an EGR device that kind of logs the hours or the miles on the EGR. You're supposed to replace the filter after 3,000 miles, but no one ever did. Showing the old fuel that's in the fuel tank. And the master cylinder was leaking and totally destroyed. Again, removing the excess brake fluid, pulling out some of the wiring harness. This goes over to the glove box on the passenger side. I did get the master cylinder and brake assist out. And at this point, I'm just removing more wiring. All right, that's nasty brake fluid I removed. And it's time to drain the gas, the 15-year-old gas, which if you've dealt with gas that's over 5 years old, I mean, it's absolutely nasty. It really, really stinks. Gets on everything and just smells horrible. Here's the fuel pump. Did look to be a newer fuel pump. These are all the attachments for the fuel pump, and this is how I ended up draining the fuel tank. I just took off some of the fittings on the fuel pump and let it drain out. There's probably about a gallon of fuel in the car. The front wiring harness, aftermarket battery cable, that's trash. All right, that's it for this episode of Wick's Garage. Thanks for tuning in. And I think what I'll do is I'll split the summary of the last couple of years of progress on the car into a two-part series, this being the first part. And I'll go ahead and upload the second part in the next couple of days, which will bring us up to date. And then I'm going to start season 2 of Wick's Garage. Can't wait to show it to you. So keep it locked in here, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.